Hi everyone, and welcome to the Utility Blueprints tutorial for the procedural foliage placement tool. This should be our last tutorial in the tutorial series for this project. And in this video, we'll be covering the remaining blueprints that are coming packaged with the project. And those are the simple path, the toggle entity types, the show widget, the teleport blueprint, actor bounds, and the hide helper. So this is going to be a pretty short video. But since these blueprints are included for various reasons, I wanted to just take a few minutes for each one and give you an overview of what you're getting, because you might find them actually useful in your own project. So if you recall from the last video, this is exactly where we left off. The only difference is I cleared out all of the actual blueprints that were spawned, the trees that changed colors. But we have here the volume, the same spawner volume here. And we have some of the obstacles and the spline. So let's take them one step at a time. If you go back under PFT to the blueprints folder, we're going to look at simple path first. And this is found here under environment. And you can see that you have BP simple path, right? We've already looked at aligned landscape, which is what we use to make this flat area here. We looked at the river. We're not going to look at the translucent water. This is actually coming from Epic Games' several projects. They had a water planes project. This is super simple. You just drop it in and change a few parameters and you have your water. So I'm not going to spend time on this. But the simple path, let's go ahead and drop it from here into the level. And if you press F, F to focus, you'll quickly zoom in and you can see here that it's very similar to the river, right? These are spline based tools. So what you do is you zoom in and you click on the first spline point there. And when you have them selected, you can then drag. And you see that now we have a little path that is being created. Notice that nothing's happening as far as the foliage. We'll have to paint the foliage out later. But this is just what you would expect, right? This is what I'm using to create the little path. And just like the river blueprint, you can go ahead and create different points. As you can see here, to make the path curved, right? And if I were to just hit play here, you'll see that it's literally just a little path. And it has a kind of a rock type texture, and it's just a path, right? What makes this a little bit more than a simple spline is that you can actually do two things with landscape, similar to the river, but this is a little bit more advanced. So if you go under setup landscape and you click on the little eyedropper and pick up your landscape, you can actually do two things. I'm going to raise it up above the ground here a little bit, and you see that there are two options: align to floor or modify landscape, right? Modify landscape is exactly what you think it is. It'll basically either raise the landscape to this level or it'll lower the landscape to whatever level this spline is. So if I just click on modify landscape, you can see that automatically the landscape is raised to match this spline, right? And if I kind of keep going here and then I go down and then I keep going down and down, notice now that now I'm going underneath the terrain, right? And this is the same. Remember how we talked about how you create new spline points? You press Alt and you drag, and that basically allows you to duplicate spline points, right? So if I were to press modify landscape again, notice that if the path is above the terrain, it'll automatically raise the terrain, but if it's underneath the terrain, it'll actually carve up the terrain as before. And in case you haven't seen the other videos or you don't remember, you need to open the material instance on your level to make sure that the foliage recalculates, right? And the way you do that is you click on the landscape, you go here under landscape and click on the little icon here to navigate to the material instance in the content browser, and all you need to do is open it. And as soon as you open it, it'll automatically recalculate. And you can see now that you can clearly see that the terrain has been raised and the terrain has been carved. As simple as that. So this is a super simple tool, but pretty useful. Obviously, the carving only works on the landscape actor. That's just part of the way Unreal Engine works. So it won't work on a regular static mesh. But if you're using a landscape, which if you're buying this project, most likely you probably are, this is a nice way of making sure that you can create a path exactly where you want it, and it'll just carve the mountains. Notice also that you have the settings here for fall off, and this is basically when the fall off basically means it'll smoothly transition between the new value and the old value, and all you're giving it is at what width will the fall off start and at what width will the fall off end. And in this case, we're just giving it 300 units of fall off, which is very sharp. If you increase this number to, let's say, 2000, and you modify the landscape again, notice that the fall off is longer. And the same thing when you're carving the terrain, notice how now you basically make a bigger hole, right? So don't feel like you're stuck with these values here. Play around with the values, but do keep in mind that there is no way to recover the terrain. So you will literally have to hit Control Z if you want to go back. There is no way, as far as I know, to undo except just by clicking Control Z. Another thing that you may want to try, and I'm kind of taking a little risk here because honestly I'm not really sure how well it'll work. It tends to be a bit finicky, but if you actually open the blueprint, the simple path here, and this is something that you will have to do, and navigate to the function modify landscape, which is conveniently open here, you'll see that this function is what is called when you want to apply an editor spline to the landscape, and you actually can automatically paint a layer on your landscape. And right now all of these up to 8, all of these slots are empty. So what you can do, and I didn't do it by default because it can be finicky, is you can try and go back to the landscape, look at the layers, and say, I want layer 4, which is 0, 1, 2, 3. So layer 3, which is soil, you can go here and say layer 3, and you can select soil layer here, and then you can click on compile. And if you exit here and go back here to the landscape, oops, 1 second, there we go, and select the simple path, you can then select the layer index as 3, and when you click on modify landscape, notice that the layer was applied, the soil layer was applied. So if I click up, notice that again the soil layer was applied, but you will have to refresh your material, and the way you do that is you literally just change a parameter. So just change the grass factor, for example, and enable it again. And notice now that the foliage is gone, right? Because the layer, the soil layer automatically removes the foliage, right? So this is a very easy way of making sure that you remove the foliage all around your path, right? Again, I didn't do it by default because it can be a bit finicky, but I would say it works most of the time. So again, open simple path, navigate to function modify landscape, and right here on the array you have up to 8 slots, and you have a landscape layer index, which is 0 by default. You can add all of your layers here, and then on the tool you can select the index, which is going to correspond to a layer here, and then you can apply the the layer painting all along the spline. So in this case, for this video, layer 3, which corresponds to the actual terrain layer, which is index 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, soil, that's why I put number 3, is what I put in there. And then here under landscape layer index, I put number 3, and that applied the soil layer. If you don't want the soil layer, for example, you just want to take out the foliage, you can use the foliage removal, which is index number 1. But again, you have to set it up in the tool, right? So really nice tidbit. Again, I would say make the change if you're thinking of using it with this specific landscape, but keep in mind, if you change the landscape material, this will need to be adjusted, right? Cool. All right, so I think we talked long enough about the simple path tool. Very simple, yet very handy way of creating your own path. And this is basically what I used when I created the little path on the showcase. So if we go back to the tutorial, this is perhaps the most important blueprint that we're going to review today in this video, toggle entity types. And for that, you'll have to go back to one of the previous videos that I talked about, which is how to convert back from instant static meshes all the way to individual actors. So let's go back all the way back to the procedural foliage placement tool, and let's open up the setup spawn actor list. Let's go back to number 0, index 0, and let's get rid of the actor class here. You can click on the little X, and that would automatically try to spawn the mesh, the pine tree mesh. We're going to do that, and then under spawn details, we're going to choose random location, which is already selected. Make sure that the actor index is 0 and press spawn actors. Okay. And we have about 1,000 some trees. Notice that the trees automatically avoided spawning on the path. And I'm sure you guessed it, if you click on the simple path and look at tags, it automatically has a tag called PFT no spawn. Remember on the previous video we talked about the hard-coded tags. Anything with this tag will be automatically recognized as an obstacle, so you don't even have to do anything. The foliage will automatically avoid the path, right? Obviously you need to create your path before you spawn your foliage, right? So now we're not gonna make too many changes here. Let's just assume that this is exactly what we want, and we go back here and say, yep, this is what we want. Let's convert these individual trees into a hierarchical instant static mesh. We click on the button, and now we see that all of the trees are just one mesh. And then we realize, you know what? We don't like these trees here. How do we don't want to remove this because we like the setup. We just want to somehow go back and eliminate some of the trees along the path. We want this to be a clearing, right? Just a random example. So how do you go back, right? And that's fairly simple, but I wanted to include a separate blueprint for it because the foliage spawner was already getting bloated with too many buttons here. So for you to do that, go back to blueprints, go under environment, oops, not environment, under utilities, nope, PFT spawner, sorry, I'm gonna get that right at some point. So go under blueprints, PFT underscore spawner, which actually makes sense. This should be grouped with the spawner, and drag your BP toggle entity types into your level. And again, this is a super simple blueprint, and you can see here that it just has 2 buttons: convert instant static meshes to actors, and convert actors to instant static meshes. Now, the reason this is in this order is because this is meant to take in an instant static mesh actor and convert it to individual actors first, right? If you spawned all of your individual actors and you want to convert them into a hierarchical instant static mesh, use the spawner because that's the way it's designed. This is more about after the fact, when everything's spawned. If you want to go back to make any changes, you can use this, right? So the way you would do it is you would select the hierarchical instant static mesh actor, and that actor is basically the actor that represents all of these trees. So you can click on the picker here, drag it onto your scene, and notice that when you hover over one of these trees, it'll automatically select it, right? And you can see here BP IHM actor. That is the actor that owns all of these instances of the trees. And once you do that, all you need to do is click on convert IHSM to actors, and notice that now each individual tree is yet again an individual actor, right? So this is how you would go back, and now you can go ahead and either move them or remove them, either way, right? make the changes that you need to make, and then when you go back to the blueprint, and then say convert actors to HISM, click there, and notice now that when you click back, all of the trees are now part of one actor, right? And you can keep going back and forth, right? And that's all it is, right? Very simple, yet very handy. Because of the way we are spawning these trees, once you convert them into one actor, it's very, very annoying to try to move one of these. You could actually go into the HISM component, which I'm not going to click, and individually go in that array and try to find that instance, which is very, very difficult, right? Another option which I would advocate is to look at a plugin by Nate in the marketplace called the Instance. I think it's called the Instance tool, which I actually own, but it's not activated here. And it lets you actually, when you go to a mode here, it lets you actually select individual instances as if they were individual actors, and you can actually move them, you can delete them, you can scale them, you can duplicate them. That is actually, in my opinion, if you don't have the tool and you're really working heavily on this, I would highly recommend for you to consider that tool. It is what I use personally. I feel like it should be part of Unreal. It's that necessary, and it makes working with instances from something that I hate to something that I love. Now, if I'm making a game, I would try to use instances as much as possible. And the reason for that is because that little plugin, I think it's only $15, allows me to individually target instances and duplicate them and keep all of my performance, right? But again, if you don't have that plugin or you just don't care for it, I'm including this little utility blueprint here that will do that conversion for you, right? So again, all you need to do is select the HISM actor, convert them back to individual actors, and then once you're done, click on this utility and it'll be converted back. All right, that's pretty much it. Show widget. Not gonna spend too much time here. Show widget and teleport. These two are blueprints that I only included here only for the showcase level, and this is why they're under the showcase folder, right? Same thing with the changing tree, right? And you can see if I just drag one into the world and I click play, all it is the tree model with a dynamic material instance and a changing material by proximity, and it has a little particle system that is trying to emulate fireflies, as you can see. That's all it is. In the previous video, we actually spawned an entire forest of these trees here, right? So not gonna really go over it. It's super simple, but if you're curious, open it up and see how I'm achieving that effect. The other one that I will show you is the BP show widget, and this is again a very simple blueprint. All it does is when the player overlaps the trigger, it'll show a widget on the screen for a specific amount of time. And all you do is you drag this on the level, and under setup you put a message title, then you put a description, and you put a message time. How long will the message be displayed? And that's it. And this is what I'm using to display the little messages as you're walking around on the showcase level. So I'm just going to go up, overlap, and as soon as I do that, you can see that the title appears with the title, which I suggested, the description text, and it appears for 10 seconds. That is all there is. Now this is handy because it has a little function that passes these values to the widget, right? So the widget is just a generic widget with two text fields. That is all, and the text is automatically being passed from the blueprint here, which is modifiable here. So it is really handy. It is a technique that I use all the time. So if you're wanting to learn how to do that, take a quick look at the code is commented. But basically that's all it is. I'm calling two functions on this widget, setting the text values to whatever is in here, and running a timer for this amount, and then hiding the message. Super simple, right? The next one is the VP teleport, even more simple. This is what I'm using towards the end, where the player steps in and it is transported to the top. If you haven't played the showcase level, make sure that you do. And all it is you select a random actor or any actor in your scene. We're going to select this guy right here. And as soon as I overlap, it'll basically teleport me to that location with a Z offset. As you can see, that is it. Right? So this is the most basic set actor location with an offset blueprint that you can think of, right? You step over and it just changes my location. That is it, right? Probably not useful. It's too simple, but there you go. Let's see what else. Actor bounce. This is actually useful, and these last two are useful, right? So actor bounce. If you remember when we talked about how to add your trees, let's see. Let's click here. And remember when I showed you how to add the actor bounce for individual meshes, I said click on the little icon here, and for you to add your collision meshes, an easy way of figuring that out is by hovering your mouse over, and Unreal will give you an approximate size, right, of the actor bounce: 470, 554, 1037, right? And you put those numbers here and you should be fine, right? But what happens if you're spawning an actor blueprint, right? An actor blueprint can have anything, right? And that is the thing. In this case, my actor blueprint is a series of components with one static mesh, which is the tree, a particle system, and a trigger. But you can have an actor with multiple static meshes scattered all around. Think about it as almost as a prefab. So how do you know the actor bounce in an easy way? You can't use the actor bounce of one static mesh because you may have more than one, right? So the way you would figure that out is by using my little components. So how would I figure out the bounce for this static mesh? For example, what you would do is you would drag it to the level as I have it here. See that? And now go into utilities, and then with this actor selected, changing tree, go ahead and drag and drop BP actor bounce. If this is an actor component, drop it right here under the components tab, and you can see that automatically it was added and it says BP actor bounce. And now if I click back to the top level, I am selecting the entire actor, but now I have an actor component called actor bounce. So click on the actor component, and right here at the bottom there is one button that says get bounce. Click on get bounce, and this will automatically give you the bounce of the actor, 4000 by 4000 by 4000. Now this bounce again are taking into account the radius of the trigger, right? Because this is simply saying, well, the actual bounce of this entire blueprint, it's not looking at the tree, is 4000 by 4000. So if I make this 500, right, the trigger is much smaller, and I go back to the bounce, notice that the bounce are now smaller, right? So keep that in mind, right? This is basically what Unreal would figure out if you would ask Unreal in Blueprint, give me the actor bounce of actor change in tree. And this is all this is doing is giving you those numbers, right? So keep that in mind. But again, it's real handy if you have a prefab and you're trying to quickly figure out what are the actual bounds. Make sure that you drop this actor component, click on get bounce, and these would be the numbers that you would enter in the bounce field, right? In this area right here, collision bounce. Those would be the numbers that you would enter there. All right, and finally, height helper. And this is so simple, it's almost silly in a way. But I wanted to show you guys why I included this. So go ahead and click on BP height helper, drag it to your level, and you can see that somehow, even though you're dragging the little actor, there seems to be something at the bottom there. It's simply a plane, right? And here, you can do a couple of things. You can select the landscape. If you go under setup, select the landscape by using the eyedropper, and then click on get landscape details. It's very similar to what the procedural foliage placement tool does. It'll give you the max and the min for the landscape. Min and max, 38,000 and minus 38,000. That's kind of the range. And then you can specify the plane scale, which is this little actor here, and the height. So right now, this plane is at height 0. So if I wanted to know what is height 10,000, you would just literally enter the number 10,000 here. And notice that coincidentally, this is exactly where the snow starts. Because remember, the snow is set up to start at 10,000 units and above, right? That's how you use this little blueprint, right? In other words, if you're trying to figure out what height to input to one of your trees and you can't quite figure it out, drag this into your level and then experiment by changing the height value, by visually saying, you know what, I want these trees to have an upper limit of maybe around here. So what number is that? Well, is it 5,000? No, maybe 7,500, right? And that way, by doing that, and it'll give you the number here as well, you can quickly determine what is the actual height anywhere in your world, and that should help you set your height ranges for your trees. That's all it is. It's literally a plane, and you can drag it like this, but even if you go up and down, the plane will stay at the specific height. That's it, right? Super simple, yet super handy. If you have a bunch of different trees and you're trying to get real complicated with when, what height some of these trees appear, use this little helper in your map if you can't figure out what the height is in a section of your map, and it'll automatically give you the right number. Enter the number on your procedural foliage placement tool, and you should be good to go. So that's it, guys. I think we've covered everything in this tutorial series. If you haven't, if you skipped the video, that's perfectly fine. You're not required to watch them all, but I would highly recommend that you do, because I do go over everything that you're getting if you decide to buy this, or hopefully if you're watching this, you already bought it, right? But I go over all of the different functionality that I'm including. First video, we took a look at the project, and we looked at all of the different things that you're getting, and we went over just high level everything you're getting in the project. Video number 2, we did an actual overview of how to create a landscape from a height map. We looked at the landscape auto material, all of the settings, how you can make sure that the foliage spawns, density of the foliage, how far you can see it, the slope settings, the height settings for the different layers, how you can control the different paint layers that you have here to create clearings and paths, etc. In the third video, we looked at the river, right? We haven't looked at this in a while, but the river that you see down here, we looked at settings for the river, how to change the material, the color, the opacity, the speed. We used it to carve the terrain, as you can see here. If you wanted to have a river carve the terrain, including the depth, which is pretty cool. Then we looked at some of the settings for the procedural foliage spawner here, the general settings, how to adjust the slope, how to adjust the height, how to add obstacles, how to avoid obstacles, how to convert individual actors to instant static meshes, how to spawn instant static meshes, how to spawn any blueprint actor that you desire, right? In my example, it was the changing tree. Then on the video after that, we looked at all 8 different spawn methods. I showed you a little table, a little handy reference guide showing you the shared settings for each individual spawn method, and you have things like a random location, which is what we're using here, just gives you a random spread. Things like organic clusters, it creates more generic and organic tree lines. You can spawn trees around the different actors by tag. You can spawn trees along a spline, and a spline can be literally anything, and you can play around with the distance from the spline, minimum, maximum, and whether it spawns on the right or the left. We looked at a grid formation. We looked at random patches, which is more fixed patches. We looked at spawn zones and how to use those, and when to use the no spawn zones in your level. And then we finally ended up with the hierarchical clusters, which is one of my favorite modes. It creates a hierarchy between trees by categorizing your foliage into high, medium, and low, and clustering your foliage based on that hierarchy, by creating very natural arrangements. And now finally in this video, we took a look at some of the additional utility blueprints that are included, things like how to convert from an instant static meshes all the way back to individual actors. We looked over how you can use the path, the simple path tool to either raise the terrain or carve the terrain. I even showed you how to apply a landscape layer, even though that's not included by default, but I showed you how to do it. In that case, it's automatically applying the soil layer, right, which looks very natural, and it even fades nicely, and also takes away the grass. I showed you the height helper, which is right here. I showed you how to use the teleport blueprint and how to use the show widget blueprint. And I think that's it. I think we've covered everything. So I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial series. I've had a lot of fun working on this tool. I really hope that you find it useful, that you enjoyed using it. If you find any bugs, please email me directly at, and I'm gonna go back and show you the email here, kokigamestudios@gmail.com. And if you have either screenshots or a long explanation so I can try to reproduce it, I would really appreciate it. I've tested it out myself, but obviously I'm not perfect. If you have any questions at all, if you have any suggestions about things that could come up in a future update, again, leave a comment on the description under this video on YouTube, or email me directly. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching the tutorial series. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, let me know what you think. Thanks everybody, and I will see you in the next video.